Name? No.
Big brother, we don't love you no more. Big brother, we can't trust you no more. They keep on pulling and pushing until we all end up wishing that now we can't take no more. Big brother, living like 1984.
Every day 1984, with the world economic form. Did I forget to mention social credit implements in the score? If you kicked out then you poor, call get declined in the store. They got us divided and fighting, distracting us from the war. Poison our food in our water, confusing our sons and our daughters. You'll own the thing and be happy, convincing you less is more. Controlling the population, creating impatient nation. Have you complacent and placing all your trust in government agencies? What George Orwell had written today is no longer fiction. They implemented a system that put us all in a prison. They want you to be the bugs in the pot, not taking care of your body. No religion and worshiping government and not God.
Big brother, we don't love you no more. Big brother, we can't trust you no more. They keep on pulling and pushing until we all end up wishing and now we can't take no more. Big brother, living like 1984.
Government tracking our phones, everything we eat GMO. They want us all driving electric controlled everywhere that you go. I ain't riding with Biden and I ain't trusting Trudeau. But in fact all these politicians, the web place around the globe, taxing on carbon emissions. They don't want you guarding your children, they don't want you having no knowledge. They want us all in the prison, trying to confusing the youth. Their agenda is proof. I don't trust these fact checkers every time they censor the truth. Hell we overpopulated. If our birth rate is shrinking, go ahead, ignore your instincts. Morals right now to sink. All the freedoms that you thought you had, they gone in a blink. Sir, you're under arrest, you've had too much to think.
Big brother, we don't love you no more. Big brother, we can't trust you no more. They keep on pulling and pushing until we all end up wishing, and now we can't take no more. Big brother, living like 1984. Big brother, big brother, big brother, big brother.
Oh, there we go. Welcome.
All right, that should be it. All right, let me know when you're ready, sir. All right, hello and welcome. This is going to be the history of mathematics and how we got to where we're at now, by going over the history and evolution of relativity theory and what they did to make it so-called covariant, to establish the rules that they say that they have now that verifies the framework. So this is the metric tensor on the general principle of covariance, the mathematic history of relativity theory. All right, so a couple definitions before we begin. So covariance, that's a theory or law or equation that represents a constant that must remain unchanged under transformation. We'll get into transformations here in a minute. So, and then invariance is a physical quantity that remains unchanged under transformation. So in certain circumstances, an invariant transformation can make or break the covariance of something, even though it wouldn't necessarily be an invariant transformation in all circumstances. So there's some give and play with that. But ultimately, the covariance of a theory is that to establish that is to establish mathematically that all reference frames, are equally valid, and that the laws of physics don't change because the equations or things that are derived from those equations don't change when they're transformed to a new reference frame. And that's what this is all about. This is what space-time and length contraction and time dilation is all about. Okay, so the mathematic rules for the postulates. So this is in regards to how Einstein mathematically came to the framework of his theory and what it was going to adhere to. So a lot of people that criticize Einstein about the mathematics, they actually call it the Lorentz-Einstein relativity theory, or Lorentz's theory of relativity, because all the equations are basically Lorentz transformations, and the whole theory adheres to what's called Lorentz symmetry or Lorentz covariance. And this is the framework that establishes that when you transform to new reference frames using Lorentz transformations, that the laws of physics will remain the same. And that's where Einstein makes his first postulate assertion that the laws of physics are the same in all reference frames and none are equally valid. So what he's talking about there is in the mathematics structure of what's going on. So when they take one reference frame and they take a measurement using, their assumed variable or their assumed fixed variables and stuff that represent the laws of physics, when they take measurements when they derive answers and solutions from their metrics from this, those things should be invariant under transformation if it's going to accurately follow the structure set forward. If it were to violate the structure, then it would show that the postulates aren't true, that either one of the laws in physics that they're using isn't true, or the whole structure isn't true. Either way, it falsifies the framework. So that's like the checks and balances of it, so to speak. So here's Einstein declaring that the content of the restricted relativity theory accordingly can be summarized in one sentence. All natural laws must be conditioned so that they are covariant with respect to Lorentz transformations. So really, really straightforward and easy. Any comments so far? All right. moving forward. So for a Lorentz transformation, this is a breakdown of what it looks like. So for a coordinate system, you have your XYZT, or you have your XYZ axis. And for space-time and the spatial descriptions, they added the time axis. So that's where they get into the fourth dimensional stuff. It's just adding another layer, another axis to the coordinate system. And then when you're doing a transformation, you have a correction value for the new coordinate. So your x-axis, instead of being what it normally is going to be velocity times time minus the x-axis coordinate. And similarly for time, they have the same thing. So this symbol right here, this is lambda. This is gamma. This is the Lorentz factor correction. So when they talk about length contracting and time dilating, this is where this comes from. So this is your t-axis right here in a Lorentz transformation. Instead of it being a normal lowercase t, you got your little special small t there. And what was it? The same with the x-axis as well over here. So what this would be distance and then time, length contracting, right? It's going to contract by the Lorentz factor. And that's where they're, that's how they mold the coordinate system to fit to C, so that they can say that the speed of light is independent in all reference frames. This is the second postulate. This is the second assertion from Einstein, is that the speed of light is invariant in all reference frames, and it's independent of the motion of the source or observer. So with that being said, this is how they algebraically manipulate the coordinate system to conform to C. So when Michealson-Morley came along and took his measurements in the initial explanation as to why they didn't get a 30 kilometers a second reading, when they talked about length contraction of the apparatus and stuff. So this is how they represented the coordinate system to describe that contraction that would be necessary in another reference frame. So, and when they did that, the speed of light remained the same. So therefore they took that as a valid explanation and proof positive that the speed of light was the same in all reference frames. Like it's a mathematical reification fallacy, to the extreme, really, because even a structure being covariant, personally, I think is a good start if you were going to build a structure or a structure to represent nature and reality. I think that's definitely a good way to have checks and balances and all that. But the way they've applied it and done away with it, they've made it completely meaningless. And we'll get into that as we move on. All right, so let's see. Whatever needs to be contracted will conform to C, and that's how they. So in the new coordinate system, like I said, your your x-axis is just this letter now. Your time axis is this. Y just becomes this, and Z becomes that, right? So that's how they do it. Okay. Oops. All right. Let's see. The goal of Lorentz covariance is for special relativity to be considered physically meaningful and to give physically meaningful results. In other words, to say that length contraction isn't just an abstract mathematical concept. This is a physical thing that actually happened. The apparatus physically shrank. And there you can get into some argumentation. And I think there's even a quote where Einstein said, or it kind of implies that maybe the contraction's apparent. But either way, apparent or physical, it's the mathematical mechanism proposed, and they've attributed physicality to it through the mathematics. And this is keeping it in alignment with covariance is how they move forward with establishing math becoming a way to verify reality. If the math checks out, right? You've heard, well, the math checks out, right? Like, well, you're going to see why here as we move on. But yeah, so this is what they do when they talk about, things being covariant and in this reference frame and that reference frame and how it's verified. It's all through the covariance of the transformations. All right. So Albert Einstein's space-time interval. So this is Einstein's original space-time interval that the early iteration of his space-time coordinate system. So this basically, with this algebraically, you can describe, any location within the coordinate system defined here, and it's this is the flat space-time that you might have heard of. So Einstein's approach to special relativity was more algebraic in nature when it originally started. Um, let's see, Einstein worked the coordinate systems, contracting the axis directly. So as going back real quick, so as you can see, he's got two gamma corrections here. Manually contracting both axes. Let's see. And then the speed of light denoted by c is treated as a constant, and the coordinate system itself is adjusted to conform to the constant speed, i.e., length contraction, time dilation, etc. And that's to say that the apparatus, physically shortened to meet light traveling at it, so that it can remain the same speed. And then later, Hermann Minkowski came along to help with covariance and transformation issues by expressing space-time in a geometric manner. And what he did basically is if you plot the time axis perpendicular 90 degrees to the axis of motion, so the x-axis, if you plot that on a hyperbola, the faster you go, the more acceleration you're experiencing in the x-axis, the more it's going to contract. And at the same time, the y-axis is also going to contract. And from that, if you plot that in a three-dimensional cone, you get the light cone thing. I'll show the slide representing that here in a second. But that was his major contribution. So we've all heard of, space-time curvature and the manifolds and all that. So that pretty much comes from him. This was a way to geometrically maintain covariance by merging the two axes, the x-axis being the axis of motion, the one that needs the contraction, and the time axis. So he put the time axis perpendicular to the x-axis. So just whatever the z-axis is, it just matches up exactly the same. And they call this a world line. And where your world line converges or diverges on the space-time graph plot is you'll see that hyperbola relationship of the curvature of space-time. And because the hyperbola scales infinitely, the faster you go, approaching the infinite speed of light, you can get to it scales infinitely with the infinite curvature and all that. So it was a really good way for them to maintain covariance by expressing it geometrically rather than algebraically, where Einstein was beating the two coordinates, beating the two axes with algebra to death. So this is a representation of what Minkowski was talking about. So if you had a stationary world line, you would be experiencing no curvature in space-time. It would just be, straight up and down. And if you were moving, so the moving world line, this would be what would be your typically your perpendicular axis to your x-axis, but because you're in motion, you're experiencing curvature of space-time. So this T up here is time axis, and this is your distance, your space axis, your x-axis. So these two are converging and diverging in on each other, and that relationship of length contraction is expressed geometrically within that. So that's where you get your light cone. So any event that happens within the coordinate system that's on this top half of this light cone, anything that happens in here is automatically covariant inherently. If something happens in here and it happens outside of here, that's where they messed up or whatever. And this is the original drawing from I think his name was Hermann Minkowski. This is his original representation of the hyperbola relationship for the geometry of space-time. All right, so any questions or anything? Yeah, it's very cool. It represents it really well.
So a hyperbolic scale means that it could literally approach the bottom line to infinity. So it just increases in infinitesimal increments as a decimal and never actually reaches zero. Isn't that a lovely, happy coincidence when you need to fake something infinitely?
Yeah, well, coincidentally, wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what a black hole is. It's infinite space-time curvature collapsed in on itself. But they've attributed, and this is known as the singularity. So if you think about, let me draw it up real quick. Let me switch. And I'm not going to get sidetracked, but I'll show you a singularity later, and it's like, oh yeah, they're attributing physicality to that. Cool story. It's so ridiculous. But anyway, to get back to what we were doing here, the joinder of special and general relativity. So here Einstein states that motion in energy is equivalent to gravitational effects. And this is done out of necessity to maintain covariance and basically co-opt the co-opt the sky. And it provided a nice way to sneak in the reification of special relativity. Because here's the thing: before we get into the joinder of these two, um, as all this was unfolding, 1887 started with Michelson-Morley, and that led to 1905's papers published by Einstein, where he proposed all this framework of covariance of length contraction to explain why there was no what's it called? Why the motion of the Earth wasn't detected, and he used a different reference frame to say that the apparatus contracted. It gamma factor corrected by the exact amount that would be needed for the heliocentric model to exist. And as that was happening, a guy named Dayton Miller was replicating Michelson-Morley experiments, showing in precise detail that the speed of light definitely varies, has a preferred direction, even when at altitude to do the experiment, showing that you get stronger readings at altitude, meaning that the motion is strongly the translation of motion is connected to the rotation of the sky rather than the rotation of the Earth or anything like that. So to move away from that, they had to discount his experiments and say that it was instrumental error, et cetera, et cetera. So that was going on from like around 1905 to 1925, 1930. And in the meantime, in 1913, George Sagnac came with his rotating interferometer and did the same experiment basically as Michelson-Morley, but it's just a rotating interferometer. And hold on one second, I have to sneeze. I'm fighting it. Okay, it's gone. So he came along with his rotating interferometer, and it showed that there was a varying speed. So special relativity said, hey, this is exempt from special relativity because the rotating device is a non-inertial frame. So, our rules don't apply. Maybe there's some variance, even though they have circular rotation derivations and answers for things that don't directly contradict the theory with the speed of light. They have solutions for those things, but when it came to Sagnac's device, they had nothing. And it wasn't until 1918 when Paul Leveux, I think that's how you pronounce it, it's a French guy, Paul Leveux came out with a metric in general relativity to account for the angular momentum on the small scale and say that basically length contraction and time dilation was happening in the apparatus due to the energy of the rotation of the device. And that was causing the length contraction. And that was, for a long time, general relativity's answer to it. And so to roll all these into one mathematical bow and tie, what's it called? The covariance of general relativity had to be expanded beyond just Lorentz transformations. And so general relativity, Einstein had to, let's see, what's the next slide? Nice. Cool, I'm on pace. So what he had to do in 1915, he started coming up with absolute differential calculus. He was introduced to that by his buddy Grossman. I think it's Marcel Grossman. Introduced him to that, and this was an early thing that was formulated by Ricky and Levi Civita in 1901. So this is like brand new, fresh off the press mathematics. And what they could do in here is they could basically form infinite matrices and descriptions of where something could be within this matrix, and then they could come up with similar matrices to express space-time curvature and how it would respond to the conservation laws and all that. And through this new method, that was how Paul Leveux was able to roll in the Sagnac effect in general relativity. But anyway, the covariance established with the absolute differential calculus that they moved on to, he expanded to any transformation. So Galilean, Newtonian, any coordinate system, everything would work under that with the new expansion to it. And the reason that it would do that is because under the new system, you could swap out metric tensors. So all these are supposed to be derived all these tensors, the key to this is that these tensors are supposed to be derived from Einstein's field equations. And these tensors from that describe the coordinate system within that, right? So what they did, or what Einstein did, is that he derived the initial space-time interval from his field equations, and then from the interval itself, he derived another matrix from within that, which is known as his pseudotensor, which is what he used to satisfy the conservation laws and stuff. And this is a huge mathematical fallacy called a first-order intrinsic invariant differential, which we'll get into here in a bit. And this basically just allows them to give the appearance of mathematics and calculation. And like, you know, when you extract these out and look at the contractions for them, it's very eloquent. There's a lot of numbers and Christoph symbols and, you know, Greek letters, a lot of stuff going on. And it looks very elegant, but it's actually physically meaningless. And it's just to satisfy a very big lie about how the speed of light changes. But the system has to protect itself, and this is how they do it. So let's see here. Any questions on the switch to absolute calculus and the new change from the coordinate system? So if you remember back the old algebraic expressions where it was like ds equals xyzt squared speed of light, all that. So this is what it starts to look like moving forward with the new versions of calculus. And then to tie them together, right? So I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over this. So to tie special and general relativity together and to broaden this covariance expansion, this right here, the equivalence principle, stating that energy and motion is equivalent to gravitational effects. So if you're in an accelerating system, you wouldn't know if it was stationary because the gravitational effects would be the same, right? It's the same concept or whatever. But this is what the reifications of that means. This is what it means mathematically to continue on those principles, right? Because we all hear about the principle of equivalence and stuff, but it's like, how does it apply? What are they doing with it, right? What does it mean? Why was it established? So it was to link both of these theories because the speed of light was consistently being disproven, and they had to link it through this covariant relationship that they were trying to establish. And with the new coordinate system expressed through differential calculus, to push that forward, that's when they started faking general relativity experiments, right? With the perihelion precession and the eclipse and all that. Because when I started looking into those, there's not even evidence for any starlight displacement. But the reason that they had to do it and had to push it through and had to do that is because of this relationship. The theory was failing so hard that they had to thrust it forward with all momentum possible with the general theory of and like just mystify people with space-time curvature, you know, and add physicality to it. Because if you look at the proofs of it, right, what they're saying is that that a photon traveling like a wavelength of light, whatever you want to consider it, whatever they consider in either model, what they're saying is that it's traveling along the curvature of something, and that's facilitating an energy transfer mechanism that's shortening the wavelength or increasing the frequency of the wavelength, you know, or inversely, depending on how it's interacting with the gravitational field. That has to be happening due to the physicality of space-time curvature. There's no way around it, and this is why they did that, because they had to attribute physicality where there was no mechanism, because they were removing the ether, and then they were going to explain etheric effects. So they were going to explain Doppler relative Doppler motion effects, right? Wavelength shifts in light with no mechanism, guys. Like, and people were educated at the time when this was happening. So this is why there was such resistance to it. We're told that there was resistance to Einstein and his theories and all this, but we're not told why. And this is why, because they remove the physical mechanism that makes all this possible, while simultaneously saying that the mechanism that exists in this math equation is what's doing it, right? And they don't like the flip from no ether to believing in this math equation is basically a huge hypnosis spell, and how they were able to, get people to be so dismissive of the idea of the ether, as well as maintaining a belief system in Earth's assumed motion. because when you look back at the historicity of it, the lack of Earth's motion turns out to somehow be the proof of it, and it also is the proof that there is no ether. And then the no proof of ether is proof that it's actually proof that space-time curvature is what the mechanism is. Like, guys, they did a real railroad here with this, and this is how they facilitated it at all.
So is this by chance related to that equation we were looking at for the permissibility of the background, which would be ether, and it was rated in like farads per meter or henries per meter?
So no, that would be more on the Maxwell side, so that they could facilitate vacuum propagation.
Oh, right.
But close though. But they did remove that from something. I can't remember what though. But yeah, that basically was the, having that included was like saying, well, there has to be something here, and and they would figure it out relative to however much the actual charge or whatever was.
Right.
You could figure out that. Yeah, so they just removed that, and we're like, yeah, it doesn't need any of that, and the stuff added with Maxwell's equation for the self-inducing field. Yeah. But I was actually going to get into that towards the end of it, just to tie it off on like what is the ether and what they removed. But yeah, you're good, bro. You're straight. So let's see here. I don't remember what this slide is, so I'm just going to wing it here. It looks like we're looking at the history of the change in equations. So we got the original expression here algebraically, and then we got it starting to take its Minkowski space-time form with differential calculus. And that's how they wrapped it all up. And the end product was this bad boy right here, where you got G subscript UV. All right. So a critique on the methodology of covariance and the illusion of it. So this was pointed out by, I don't have the citation for it right now, but this was pointed out in a paper that I read recently. And I'm just going to read from it because it really expands upon what the possibilities are when you switch to differential calculus, and what that means in terms of trying to establish a covariant relationship. And does that relationship have any physical meaning after what the effects of differential calculus are? So this is the critique put forward. Let us consider the general claims of general relativity theory. We begin with the myth on covariance. The ambiguous solution to any differential equation is determined except the form of the equation also by specification of the initial and/or boundary conditions. If they are not specified, then in the general case, the covariance either does not determine anything, or at changing the character of the solution can even result in physical nonsense. If, however, the initial and/or boundary condition are specified, then with substitution of the solution with the obtained identities, which will remain to be identities in any case for any correct transformation. For any solution, it is possible to invent the equation for which will be invariant with respect to some specified transformation. If we properly interchange the initial boundary and/or boundary conditions. So what he's saying there is, when you swap in different metrics, because I don't have any prepared on this slide, or actually I have a couple, but when you get into the metrics that they use to describe the grand scale of the universe, the different types of curvature, Ricci curvature, Minkowski curvature, Riemannian curvature, Minkowski curvature, all these, Einstein's tensor, Einstein's gravitational tensor, Einstein's stress tensor, all these things, what she's saying is that when you swap them in and out to fit any physical phenomenon, you can extrapolate the result, and it'll fit your theory covariantly under any transformation that you specify it to. So getting back to the first order intrinsic invariant differential things, they give the appearance of covariant transformations under certain transformations, but they are in fact not in the same dimension as the coordinate system that they're ascribed to be in, because they are not derived from the field equations, and they're derived from the interval itself. this reification fallacy, the results of that put them outside of the coordinate system that they're, so like the gravitational field isn't actually in the coordinate system, that it's saying that it's bending and warping and all that. Like that's the result product of this fallacy, and not acknowledging that or not bringing it up is how they get away with continuing the calculations and attributing physicalness to it. So in the case of what she points out here with the solutions can even result in physical nonsense. Well, when you impose a condition on the metric that breaks the metric, i.e. the Schwarzschild metric, if you were to, I don't know, impose a radius on something that should have more gravitational mass than its radius should allow or whatever, it will it breaks the metric and causes an infinite curvature of space-time, which they attribute to, you know, a black hole, and, you know, which they say that not even light can escape and all this stuff. This is what comes out of this like these sorts of mythological sky creatures created from math equations. This is how they're derived. So they impose conditions on the metric that broke it, and then they turn the breaking of the metric into a deity that they attribute physical effects to, that it bends photons, alters directions, and things of that nature. This is where it all comes from this covariant relationship. And it's like, well, you know, they just, when you have that level of freedom with it, there's, you know, there's no checks and balances, and it's really just like once you learn the math of it and you're familiar with it, you know, you can just join in on the role play as long as you're capitulating to, you know, the overall standards of not questioning the mathematic reification fallacies of it all. You get to play in the sandbox, and you get degrees, and you get paid to, you know, attribute etheric effects to math equations. And to wrap up, this is getting close to the end of the presentation here. So I didn't put this in yet, but to end on Stephen Crothers' work, if you go to Sky Scholar's YouTube channel and type Stephen Crothers, I'll have links for it towards the end. You can watch him contract a tensor and express exactly what I'm talking about now, and show that it is a first order intrinsic invariant differential, and it, therefore anything derived from it has no physical meaning. It's just a blank slate for them to interswap metrics and give the appearance of mathematics. All right, and so let's see, there was definitions for the Crothers stuff, but I didn't add that yet, so we don't have to get into that. And I think that was it. So that's all I got so far for that. What do you think? Any thoughts, comments, concerns, lads?
On how this affected the ether and proofs and all that.
What's that?
You know, I'd like to include wild speculations on the ether and how they mathematically like removed it after they physically couldn't remove it.
Yeah, so one sec, let me pull up the Maxwell equations here.
But no, I mean, like that was really good and really cool, really informative. People on Rockfin are feeling really informed, by the way. That was the comment.
Nice.
So
Nice, that's dope. I don't have the Maxwell stuff prepared. Wait, do I? Hold on. Let me check this presentation real quick. I have another one that I'm building on the slide, and I think I have the Maxwell stuff on it. That's a negative on the Maxwell. Oh, no. I have a reference slide, but no actual material in the slide. So don't have the equations prepared. But yeah, what he did basically was, if you look at the model of a photon of the dipole, right, you'll see that the electric current axis, and then perpendicular to that, there's a magnetic field axis. And that follows the right-hand rule. So if you take your thumb right now and, you know, do like a thumbs up and curl your fingers in, and you say that the electric current is the direction of motion of your thumb, so going upwards, the magnetic current, the corresponding magnetic current will be magnetic field will be flowing in the direction curling your fingers, and you could move your arm in any direction to figure out, you know, which way the magnetic field will be flowing with respect to the current. So when you look at the diagram for it, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at when they talk about the dipole, so that's the magnetic field and the electric current field. That's the intersection point between those two. is carried by a charge potential. So when they make radio waves and they're charging up an antenna to send a frequency out and all that, they're charging up, the ether, and then they're sending out a wave through that, and that's being the charge potential is being carried through that, and that used to be accounted for in the calculations because no experiment ever has ever shown that a magnetic or that a electric field can self-induce a magnetic field, and then further a magnetic field can self-induce an electric field, and then it just keeps self-inducing with no charge potential in between them. So to further propagate and hide the necessity of the ether, they Maxwell came in and added this to I believe it was Ampere's original equation, which I have notes here, but I don't know if you can see them. 1 second, let me change the.
You're not even sharing.
Yeah, I know. I'm about to change it up.
It's like,
can you see it? You're good. You're good. Can you see it now?
Can we see them? Yeah, it's hard to read though.
Okay, let me zoom in here. Let me see if this helps.
Oh yeah. There you go.
So we got this big beast right here, right? This is Ampere's original expression of how the magnetic and electric fields interact or propagate. And let's see what it's too zoomed in. Hold on. What your boy added over here was this section to it over here, which says he added that, which says that there's no need for anything to carry the charge potential in between it. It can be zero, and it'll still the field will still self-induce itself, or will self-induce another field, which will then self-induce the original field. So that's what they started with mathematically, and he changed Coulomb's law. Ampere's law, and two other ones that are in that paper, but I haven't gone over the full entirety of it. But that's essentially what he did. So when you talk about radio waves, that's how they propagate. Like through the ether is what's carrying the charge, and they just say that it's nothing, and they talk about how the wave is like generated, but they don't talk about why, like what's carrying it and all that. Right. They just have this math equation, and they teach you to calculate, so you don't think about it, you don't relate it to anything, and you hear over and over again that Michelson-Morley proved that there's no ether, and that through covariant transformations, the Earth's orbital velocity was somehow confirmed through a gamma factor correction, so a second order correction to what should be a first order measurement. It's like they got these people all looped up.
Well, if you take a step back and you kind of think about it, it almost seems like the ether being hidden is their main focus for all this. It's why they led Einstein around by the nose. It's why they made it illegal to question him as from the ADL and then the old school. And if you wanted to debate him, you were an anti-Semite. And that's the whole guard that they put up around everything, like right down to modifying the math equation so you can allow electrical charge to perpetuate itself and require no permissivity of the background, even though they had previously declared, measured, and quantified the permissivity of the background. No longer was necessary for that to propagate in perpetuity, which is complete and utter nonsense, mathematical and otherwise. So the whole game and the whole goal and the whole circuit has been to remove the ether mathematically from from the historicity, from the mathematics, and from the education, so that you had no idea how anything worked in reality. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, it was that's exactly it. It's how they could have people calculating things and working with these things and not realizing the significance of what it actually is, and how they would do it in disguise. In 1922, there's a paper I was just reading that was covering 3,700 some critiques of Einstein that were suppressed in Germany because it became illegal, or not illegal. I'm sorry. It became
Germany should know better.
Yeah, it became not academically advantageous to criticize Einstein, so they suppressed all these papers. And if you wanted to publish something, well, you weren't going to publish it criticizing Einstein.
Right.
So
it's like for me, it's always like what they try to cover up the most is the truth, right? So if ether is the thing that they're trying to make you not look at and don't look at, no, discredit, and it's goofy, and Wikipedia will tell you that it's been disproven by Michelson-Morley, which couldn't be further from the truth. And when I started with this journey, the ether I accepted as something that was necessary for the phenomenon that I interpreted to to work like on flat Earth. Like the science has to be there. And I went from it's something that I'll never be able to prove to anyone, which I'll quietly accept and move on, to actually it's like the most fundamentally proven, relied upon technology in like the history of mankind. Like you were doing the awesome work on GPSs and interferometry, the Sagnac effect, the preferred direction, all of that is direct proof of the ether, right? So now it's a whole new world.
Yeah. Yeah, the like I was saying, the history of interferometry and GPS and just how radio waves propagate all is ether technology. It all shows evidence of an ether, and they've just got everyone outright denying it due to a belief system in an incoherent, philosophically bankrupt and mathematically bankrupt system that they protect with such vigor and degree that like they don't even it's so crazy that like people don't even have to understand the theory to defend it. They just have to say space-time because it's such a good job has been done in terms of propagandizing the like deifying Einstein is like this guy that came around and just discovered that the universe is actually space-time curvature, and he expressed it through his math equations. He just like deciphered the whole universe. Like they literally created like a sky prophet. Like you can't question Einstein's space-time curvature.
He is a prophet.
That's like,
You can't question the
yeah,
word.
dude.
Who are you? You're not a priest. You don't know.
Yeah, that's what it's really like, man. And the language that he writ his prophecy in was in mathematics,
Right?
right? Because math's a language. It's a descriptive language. It describes things. Well, if you have a coordinate system that's a blank slate that you could swap in and impose conditions on, and say that it has covariance to it, then the world is your oyster, as they say, right? You can become a literal math magician and explain the sky by attributing any physical phenomenon to something that doesn't exist by simply saying that it caused the coordinate system you use to describe the phenomenon to warp and distort to conform to any presupposition you have to reify the need for your coordinate system to describe it.
Utter self-serving masturbatory absurdity. That's what all that is. My God.
Yeah. Yeah, so to wrap up real quick on ether experiments, so as I was kind of going over the historicity of it and why they had to jump in so quickly with general relativity and moving that forward was because so Michelson-Morley 1887 showed a varying speed of light and not enough to correspond with the Earth's orbital velocity. Sagnac came along, showed the same effect, but without applying the scale of interpretation that they were using, they were able to determine that this was a relationship, that this established a relationship with the sidereal rotation as it matches within 98% accuracy with no corrections. And the same thing here with Michealson-Gale, where it's basically the same as a Sagnac interferometer, except they added an extra mirror and it's stationary and just it's way longer. And with that effect, it also showed a varying speed in the direction of light, or preferred direction of the propagation of light, east to west. And let's see here. While that was going on, Dayton Miller was continually doing observations. He did 5,200,000 measurements of the ether, corresponding to the sun's motion in the sky. So what he showed was that during the equinoxes, the ether speed would either increase or decrease following the movement of the sun as the seasons are created on a stationary plane. And let's see, and then this guy did this. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Not even going to try. Dufour-Pruner. He did a Michelson-Morley type experiment. Did the same exact thing in 1942. Found the same situation, or the same friendship pattern that they say was tending towards zero, which it isn't. And then this guy in 2001, Yuri Galev, 2001 and 2002, did a radio interferometry experiment with millimeter waves and showed that there's a preferred direction of light, or electromagnetic propagation rather. And let's see, Ruyong Wang in 2004 generalized the Sagnac effect, 100% unequivocally showing that it's not due to angular rotation. So a big thing for general relativity to scoop up the Sagnac effect was attributing the effects to angular rotation, as that's what gave it immunity from invalidating special relativity. But what my boy Ruyang Wang here showed in 2004, by linearizing the effect using a linear interferometer on a conveyor belt, he established an absolute frame of rest in what's known as a lab reference frame. And so he essentially canceled out any assumed motion of the Earth relative to his latitude, and the effect still persisted. So that's 100% evidence that the Earth is stationary with respect to an ether wind, and the fact that it's directionally dependent and not dependent on angular rotation completely invalidates general and special relativity's ability to co-opt it and put it, roll it into the fold like they've been trying to do. So this Manura Hector and his boys did a Michelson-Morley interferometer experiment as well in 2006, and wouldn't you know it, they measured the ether again. And this is Robert Bennett, who did a review of Ruyang Wang's test and points out that that in addition to the lab frame reference proving a stationary Earth with respect to an ether wind, that there is a covariant violation during the transformation of the vectors of motion that are used to derive the effects in relativity theory. So, fun fact in relativity, only one axis of the axis of corrections has to be the same. So, in other words, something's y-axis can't be, time contracted, or can't be length contracted. It has to be represented like all uniformly in this weird way that I think is kind of weird, but I don't know how to show you a representation of it quite yet. But yeah, it's really weird that they how they do all this. And so here we have a review of Michelson-Gale's experiment and the preferred direction of light, showing that east to west is the preferred direction. Just to close out with all the experiments and references. So all this stuff will be provided in the video description, so you can download it and
Nice.
look it up for yourself. Because the important thing here is that when we talk about what's repeatable, what's an experiment, what's an observation, what's the independent variable, and all that. Well, we have all the evidence for ether. We have all the evidence for a stationary Earth with respect to an ether wind. We have it all, and we should yield none of it. So we should start utilizing this evidence and putting it forward as direct refutations to what they claim, because they actually have no evidence, and all of their experiments that are put forward as so-called proofs of general relativity have no way to differentiate between classical mechanic effects, mathematically speaking, because it has to be what's the word I'm looking for, covariant with the transformations. So it couldn't even distinguish it to begin with. So I think it's time that we, moving forward, we start talking about how what's been hidden and what they've done, like why they did all this. Because what came out of this in Germany when they started censoring the criticisms of this was all to hide the fact that there's an ether and the Earth is stationary. And this is the 100% repeatable scientific evidence of that they've tried to hide and suppress with mathematics that nobody can understand. And they just claim that, oh, well, we can calculate it in this reference frame. No, I'm sorry, man, that's over now. My boy Ruyang Wang ruined that too with GPS. So there will, yeah, that's my end of the rant on that. So did anyone have any questions or comments or anything like that from the chats?
Just appreciation and love from Rockfin. Yo, but just like the last to sum up this wonderful presentation and like the takeaways for people who are probably not waiting in the details and loving the Lorentz transformations and heavy duty Einsteinian mathematics and tensor, that's not for everyone. But like the main takeaway, right, is that everything that we've ever measured that they've said is Earth's rotation is only ever been sidereal rotation. We've only had different methods of measuring the sidereal motion of the sky, which science as a whole has largely misinterpreted and misrepresented as Earth spin, and that no one has ever measured the Earth's orbital velocity around the sun, because all these interferometry experiments should be picking up that much greater, larger motion, and it doesn't have any effect, and no one has to account for it, and it has no effect on anything because it's simply not there.
Yep, they only get the velocities needed under transformations where they impose conditions where they can extrapolate more contractions so that they could get more fringe patterns that don't exist that they can hypothetically attribute more velocity to.
Right.
That's the only way. That's the only way they can
Well,
do it.
so like fringe patterns in the first place, right? Are they how are they deciding how much of a pattern yields how much to a translation of motion? They just made it up, or what?
I think so, man. But the only thing that I could say to that would be when they apply the sidereal time to Michelson-Gale, it revealed within 98% accuracy that there was like a strong that's what caused it. So if they were trying to extrapolate some speed out of it or whatever relative to the 15 degrees per hour, I would say that the 1,000 miles an hour equatorial globe rotation would probably be the closest measurement to the translational speed that they have since it corresponds to the 15 degrees per hour. But I guess you could say that translational speed could really be anything, though, couldn't it?
Right. Right. I mean, like, so if we add that gyroscopes, like mechanical actual gyroscope, like gyroscope compass, regular gyroscopes don't actually show the rotation of the Earth. No one has ever measured any sort of rotational measurement with a mechanical gyro. It really just supports the fact that all measurements of purported Earth rotation are only just interpreted measurements of the sidereal rotation of the sky.
Yeah, yeah, that's another way to put it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
I love it. Because now I'm much more comfortable on my stance, and I know I've chosen the right side and the side of truth. Because it just makes way more sense now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they just attribute that, and that's probably why we don't get any interferometer data for the correction angles and stuff or readings in the south because it's probably wildly different from what would have to be symmetrical on the globe. And it
Absolutely.
would it would reflect extreme in there, especially starting from the equator and it would just be really interesting to have that data and it would be available, but it's not, and you can actually only find tailored specific northern hemisphere data that just happens to match correction angles to Polaris, 1 to 1 on a plane or on a sphere. So who's to say which came first, the celestial sphere or the celestial dome?
Right? So if you can't actually measure any of Earth's motion using a mechanical gyro, you could only measure it using interferometry and super high-tech devices aimed at the sky. Then wouldn't it make sense that what you're actually measuring is the sky?
Dude, when you say aimed at the sky, I mean it's so funny, or it's so like one of those things that's like the globe where they say that they're axial tilted at 23 degrees, so it just happens to work out for them again.
Yeah, the coincidences are staggering,
Yeah,
dude.
dude, it's funny. But yeah, they literally tilted to the sky and they're like, well, it's parallel to the assumed rotation of a ball. It's
Right?
or it's just the axis of rotation of a vortex over a plane. Like how would you distinguish? And in fact,
Well, you would
mathematically speaking, you
you
couldn't. It would have to
yeah.
be a mathematically viable
Yeah,
under
that's the thing, right? How would you distinguish the measurements they're taking from a flat Earth with sidereal rotation of of a sky versus a hypothetical fake fantasy spinning ball at the purported rate? That was the purpose. They backward engineered the measurements to fit that fantasy ball, but in reality, they comport with the measurable reality, and that's why the southern measurements are so important. Because how would you differentiate measurements in the south? Exactly that. If we had data where they had to like measure it. They had to align their laser interferometry with the hypothetical position of an invisible Polaris below the feet of your horizon. So yeah, show me that the Earth's a sphere by aligning it to the axial rotation, right? So they'd have to go to the south and take measurements aimed at their feet and have the same results, which I would say probably wouldn't happen.
yep, correct. And the modern interferometers you wouldn't know anyway because each axis has its own or I'm sorry, the modern gyroscope inertial guidance systems and stuff, they have
Oh right.
another gyroscope for each axis, so you would never even know if it had to do that at all.
Oh, see, that's why when I yelled at a Glober that they have to align their interferometry with this guy, he was like, "Nah." And I was like, "Oh, well, I guess you wouldn't." Yeah, never mind. Withdrawn.
Yeah,
You wouldn't
yeah,
notice.
yeah. It would only be if you had a single or like a single axis or whatever. It's like that's why that guy's single interferometer, he had to rotate it and flip it and then add it up and get the average.
Right, right. Well, this is a nice, wonderful, short 60-minute presentation. We're right at an hour. Does anyone else have anything to add? Any questions, comments?
Well, yeah,
But other
I could add something. The paper by Ether, by Michael Brenner about Ether. I just highlighted a couple areas. I think you both read it already, but to go along with what you were saying, just a couple paragraphs here. He says, no technology operates on the basis of the negation of ether. The entire field of electrical engineering is nothing but the engineering of ether polarization. That people are unaware of that is just because schools are manipulated into teaching an etherless world. Oliver Heaviside and Carl Pontius Steinmetz should be household names, but they aren't. Why? They are, after all, the fathers of electrical engineering and thus the fathers of our electrical civilization. They are kept in obscurity because they teach ether physics, and broad awareness of the potential of the ether is the greatest threat to power monopolies who thrive on the control. That is the scarcity of energy. And then he goes on to talk about Tesla,
Ooh, that's
saying that the nature stored
bone-chillingly
up
on
the
point.
energy. Yep. And then at the end, he says, all ancient technologies and mythologies are applied ether physics. We just don't understand that anymore because math has taken over the field of science. In ancient times, science was done in spoken language, which you could relate to and transmit to the ordinary people. Modern science is a secret cult using a language that is totally detached from physical reality, as well as intuitive understanding. Would physicists and mathematicians be forced to express their findings in spoken language, anyone would immediately recognize the scam that has been perpetrated.
Holy shit. Isn't that just like the perfect summation statement, dude? That's excellent.
Yeah.
man, yeah,
Wow.
well said. Shout out to my boy Michael Brenner out there killing it on Quora.
Damn, that
No,
dude's a legend.
that's absolutely what they've done, man. And it's sad to see it because you'll see people argue against the ether with such visceral and such lack of understanding of what even how they removed it in the first place and what they now have to believe to as the replacement. And it's just like it's profound and dark at at the same time that it's like possible to trick people on this level.
Yep. They reverse engineered the mathematics and then made everybody math heads,
And then they
right? As
frowned
like
upon
a
you if you didn't get
pinnacle.
the math head language. You don't understand
Yeah.
the Einsteinian lingo? Well, you're a dunce. It's
Yeah.
like, well, no,
Exactly.
you're reasonable and logical and rational. Get him!
Right. Right. You can't apply common sense, but you can apply the mathematics. That's the rule.
Dude, the way he said it was so right. If it was just the way it was, then we could converse in it and explain it to the layperson. Everyone would get it. But we can't have
Yep.
that because then we can't exercise control and keep everything away from you idiots. So we'll have to put science in a language that only the secret cults can understand, and everyone will just defer to the authority. Oh, what a terrible scheme.
Yeah, and the speed of light is so key to all of that, which she's talking about further on in that paper and previously in between. Yeah, that was a huge thing for them to keep it going. But now it's been dispelled by people like Alan and you and Brenner and other people that are just realizing that the common sense language has to be able to coincide with the understanding of all these things, and it's by rule not able to.
Yeah, man. Shout out to Alan for critiquing and going against Einsteinian relativity with tensor equations and all the sorts of advanced mathematics without actually having to wade through the nonsense of the advanced mathematics language that they invented to do so, right? Because a lot of people would be intimidated by that. Like, oh, I can't discredit it. Yeah, but you don't have to understand the nonsense to identify that it is in fact fucking nonsense.
No,
Yep.
once I realized that there's rules to it, like that was a wrap. And then and then from there you could understand the critiques of the rules. Because a lot of this stuff I would hear about through other presentations and research that I did earlier. Because actually this whole covariant thing is built upon something I found out like 2 years ago that I didn't really understand at all that I've now built upon through just deciphering it through like reverse engineering, learning the narrative, right? So yeah, like once you understand that there's rules, and then you can understand the critiques of how the rules aren't being applied, and then when you come across something like Wang, who doesn't, who can't put it out in obvious terms, but what he shows you is like these invariant or these non-invariant transformation violations, and it's like, oh snap, like this is bad for the whole thing, like not just philosophically or like one experiment or hey we got to rethink this, like he body bagged the whole thing like from the ground up. So it's been really fun to learn the narrative and history of it. But yeah, like in terms of like doing the equations and the math and like watching it, it's super boring and dense. Like I watched Crothers do it a couple of times, and it's just it's wake me up when September ends. It's one of those deals.
But it's by design. It's meant to do that, right? It's meant to
Yeah,
lull
it's
you
meant
into a
to.
sense of not listening and paying attention, so that later you have to surrender your understanding to the authority who you assume did understand all the nonsense that you zoned out.
Yep, and that's why they went hard at discrediting him, because he understood the math, saw what was going on, started critiquing it, and literally got and a big thing that was revealing, not understanding the math, but just watching the narrative unfold, because he has it all documented, all his correspondence with the heads of faculty at the University of New South Wales, and like how this whole thing went down. Every time that they would address his critiques to Einstein, they would never address his mathematics critiques to them. They would, this guy that was in charge of like the critiques and all that or whatever, or like reviewing this, he literally changed Crothers's work, and then based on the change that he made, he then went on to review the inaccuracy of how it didn't apply, of how Crothers was misapplying it based on the change that he made to invalidate his work to begin with.
That's
And then
awesome.
as if he didn't do that at all. And then when Crothers would bring it up, the guy just no response, no response. When he brought it up at the board review meeting at the University of New South Wales, like this guy's bosses, right? Some accountability, because like let's say let's say Crothers is wrong and this is all a misinterpretation. Your boy changing his work and then critiquing it based on that and failing him out of the program or whatever, making him not able to complete his indoctrination. Uh, that's super unprofessional, right? No ramifications for that. No, no, no. Oh yeah, he definitely shouldn't have did that. That's wrong. None of that. And then it got to the point where it escalated, where he was corresponding with someone from the International Gravitational and Space-Time Committee, which is your theory's solid when you have a committee to verify everyone's holy interpretations of the mathematics scriptures. And so he was arguing with one of these bigwigs, and the guy was doing the same thing and not addressing it, and was just like, "Look, guy, you think you're one of these smart boys, but you're not smart as Einstein. So I don't know why you can sit here and think you can mathematically critique a genius, you dummy." Like, and it was just so apparent that it was like, oh, you can't
The
critique
emperor
these
has no
guys or tell
clothes.
yeah, you can't tell these people nothing, bro. So like, even if you don't understand the mathematics or whatever, don't be deterred from understanding that they have rules that they aren't following, and the rules heavily involve hiding the varying speed of light, which has been shown ad nauseum experimentally,
Right.
and
They
every day, all day.
they're using math as a weapon to like befuddle and confuse and obfuscate, and really you don't have to know like which specific equation they're hitting you on the head with to know that you should stop, right? Like, hey,
Yeah,
what you're telling me doesn't make sense. Like still a language, and they're applying it illogically. So all you have to do is think logically and see how they're applying their own created, contrived mathematical formulas, and see that it makes no sense. And that's all you need to debunk it.
yep. That's why they have to sensationalize things like black holes and space-time curvature and all that,
Man, that was
because
poetic.
it's all dependent on you believing in it.
That was poetic the way you described that. You were like, this is how they make the boogeymen and the sky monsters. They take these mathematical objections that just get created, and then they spin these fairy tales and bedtime stories around them. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what they do. That's how black holes and quasars and dark holes and light holes and all these things came into being.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did, and that's the mechanism of how it was done. So yeah, thanks for your time. We can wrap up the presentation now. I think that's everything. Thanks for the contribution at the end there, Dave. That was awesome, dude. Brenner nailed it because that's exactly one to one what's going on, man. And you can, it's so evident now that we have the research, to back it up.
Yep, for sure.
It's
Absolutely.
all on our side.
Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna wrap it up on the stream here. We'll go to the actual. What's it? What's our boy Issa gonna sing? Is it "Welcome to the Show"? That's the outro. That's right.
Nice. Yeah, play us out. Yeah, I forgot to record again, so I got to hit up that that download off here.
Welcome to the show where you don't know if it's part of the show. Welcome to the show if you don't know it's part of the show. Didn't they teach you to reach for the stars while opening up the bars and keeping you chained down with mortgage bills and cars? Vaccines for your arms, kids sounding like supercharged, caffeinated hate-filled scars and rage-quit repertoires. No answers for yards, caught up in emotion that's not even yours. Imposter truths like impeccable retards, lined up for your serving of Gish Galloping wars. No remedy can't save the lost, in love with the yarn. I'm tired of walking into refracted shards, poor science displayed by disgusting bards. Soaked in sin with your dupe is delight in a new hand of cards. Been so long, seems like for love I'm just too hard, I'm just too hard, I said. Welcome to the show where you don't know if it's part of the show. Welcome to the show if you don't know. Intoxicated 8 makes you believe you're spinning in space while you have no shame or grace. It's a disdainful state I used to contemplate how to save myself from my own self-hate. Wonder why I was even made with a dreadful fate, forced to try and awake with a full plate, no one to help me stay awake or educate. I've had to liberate and fight through hidden gates, but my brother, heaven could never be late, and rockets don't work in space. It's all fake, the show is on Mars, it's a joke, but you're too far gone, it won't be long. Fepe's beak is strong. We have our song and we march along like streams of knowledge leading to God's holy pond, and lives of truth that hits the bong and sings the song, turns mankind from the wrong. We come in peace with a holy gown and all of us wearing our holy crowns. Said the earth is flat and we probably just won't get along, just to go along. I said, welcome to the show where you don't know if it's part of the show.